The year is 1965 and we're in Washington, D.C., but let me take you 26 years back to 1939, Willis, Texas for better understanding. A young lad named Bernard Garrett worked as a shoe shiner a few meters from the door of the largest bank in town, the Bank of Texas. Young Garrett gained more than the coins flipped at him. He gained knowledge, one he'd later apply. A prophet isn't known in his own country. Bernard's dad didn't believe a colored man could amount to any good, let alone his wife's uncle. The year is 1954. Bernard moved to Los Angeles with his wife Eunice and son Bernard Jr. Trying to look for a job for him, Eunice's uncle offered Bernard a job at the plant, adding that they accept people of their kind. But Bernard knew better. Next morning, Bernard drives his cousin to work where he meet a colleague, Max Steiner, who couldn't stop staring at Bernard's car, wondering what he did for a living. The search began, moving from one building to the other, searching for the asking price of each building up for sales. The search party didn't end in utter disappointment as Bernard found a building which he could afford but would leave him penniless after the purchase. Beauty with brains. His wife Eunice suggested they find a cool partner in the business, and she knew just the right man for the job. Joe, a rich-ass businessman. Joe didn't put up so much of a first impression as he didn't strike Bernard as a man to do business with, although his wife thought otherwise. Bernard was left with a choice: work with Joe or beat down the price. That's right, he took the latter. At that point, Bernard would have rather kissed a pelican's foot than sign deals with old Joe. Offering $10,000 below asking price isn't just fit to be called a good start, as Mr. Barker refused to sell the building at $30,000. But before Bernard left the office, he got an important information. A name: Mr. Reed of the Mid-City Bank. Being the CEO, Bernard couldn't get an appointment with him at that time but waited patiently outside, because surely what goes up will definitely come down. Outside the bank, fair weather, Mr. Reed gets confronted by Bernard, who used Mr. Barker's name to ask for a $10,000 loan from the City Bank to complete the payment for the house. Bernard got a call that night from Mr. Barker. Despite being manipulative, Mr. Barker was okay with his smart move and the house was purchased. This was a very important move. A black-owned building in a white neighborhood wasn't really welcomed by an average white American at that time, let alone this old lady. She was a tenant and hated Bernard so much, she even called the cops on him, accusing Bernard of falsifying documents. Too sad she couldn't stand a colored man being her landlord, she moved out in no time. Second impressions could replace the first if your name is Joe. The unsmokable Bernard Garrett became highly inflammable. With successful blacks getting a chance of moving into a white neighborhood, the building was fully booked with speed of light. Who would have thought? Mr. Barker had more deals for Bernard. Seeing such success, they agreed on a 50-50 deal, with Bernard working the phones and investors while Barker appears as the face. This was done over a handshake and was neither signed officially nor documented anywhere. More houses were easily with me Baker. No one was willing to sell a property to a colored man in a white neighborhood. Charity begins at home, they say, and if he was getting some for the black folks out there, surely there was one for his home too. Just when things were moving smoothly, the serpent thought it a good time to strike. Barker died. His wife had the intentions of stealing everything from Bernard, offering him mere pennies on a dollar. There was no witness to testify Mr. Barker's intentions but Mr. Reed, who wasn't interested because Mr. Barker's wife banked with him. Walking out furiously and vexed in spirit, a brilliant idea popped in Bernard's head. If Muhammad couldn't go to the mountain, how about the mountain walked right to Muhammad? Someone's got to do some praying, you know. Time for Joe to hop in fully. They were going to buy the tallest commercial building in downtown Los Angeles. Brilliant. The idea in Bernard's head was this: if we're their landlords, they'll give us a loan without thinking twice. But Joe had to bring to his memory that there wasn't a single black-owned building in downtown Los Angeles at that time. Asking a straight question: how would it happen? Bernard Garrett, the genius, had just the right answer to that. This guy, Matt Steiner, was gonna pull the strings off. He would be Mr. Barker replacement. Still asking questions like, how can it be, Lord, seeing that I'm but a child? Matt Steiner met an old junior in high school who probably had a crush on him. They got entangled themselves up in a marriage. Matt had to learn to tie some knots before finally he was ready to meet with Charles Bernard, the owner of the building. First at the club to play golf, then on the deal day. Matt had to memorize all the numbers. This alone mesmerized Charles, getting the deal just in time. Voila, the building was Bernard's, not forgetting Joe too, and of course Matt, one more person. Lady Eunice. Cheers, the new owners were in town. Wait for the look on Mr. Reed's face when Bernard walked right past him. They even got a photograph with the Vice President Johnson. After visiting his dad back home and moving around the block past the bank where he used to shine shoes, Bernard had a new vision for his life. He wanted to replicate his success at home. He wanted to buy the Mainland Bank in Texas. Joe was playing. It was a bad idea, but he jumped right off the cliff with Bernard anyways. Bernard and Joe all set at the Mainland Bank in Texas. The deal was to be closed officially, making Joe and Bernard owners of the Mainland Bank. Bernard quickly initiated his plan to change the policy concerning loans to Negroes in Texas, empowering them to open businesses, make money, and repay the loans. Things were going as planned, but Florence, a major stakeholder, had much suspicion, making things difficult for Matt. From mapping each new loans to black folks, to stalking Matt Steiner, Florence's suspicion grew rapidly. He had a plan to sabotage the bank. The quarterly inspection of banks was around the corner due to anonymous tips of unsafe loans. Less than a month before the feds would burst the bank, Matt suggests they buy another bank, the Bank of Marlin, to transfer the Negro loans there, but Joe and Bernard weren't financially ready for that option. With some pressure from his wife, Matt was able to convince Joe and Bernard to purchase the Bank of Marlin. With only 3 months of learning, Matt had imposed his new position as the owner of the Bank of Marlin, an idea Joe was not in support of. Due to inexperience, Matt ended up signing wrong papers with falsified figures, arranged by a lawyer who was introduced to him by the same Florence as opposed to the lawyer referred by Bernard. The Bank of Marlin was in deficit and was at the verge of being closed down. Meanwhile, at the Mainland Bank, 5 white customers had withdrawn their money because they thought it was owned by black folks. After meeting with the officer from the Federal Currency Comptroller Office, Marlin Bank was dissolved. Matt tried buying Marlin's face value deficit through Mainland Bank to save it. Still in the office, a group of individuals, including the deputy for the comptroller of the currency for the Southern District, stumped in. Matt, Joe, and Bernard were in trouble. The bank's license to run had been withheld and Matt was fired at the spot. Bernard and Joe gets worse, arrested, guilty to different charges. Meanwhile, Matt was facing 50 years and had to lie in court to save his head, stating that he was manipulated by Joe and Bernard. To get lighter sentences, Bernard was told to question the banking laws, pointing out the loopholes he took advantage of, to the feds for amendment to prevent such thing from ever happening again. Instead, he flipped the coin, lamenting on how the blacks have been marginalized and couldn't purchase buildings in certain areas, questioning the American dream. Bernard and Joe were given 3 years. They came out almost completely empty, just that they had a house in the Bahamas. How? Heavy-laden. Matt had called Bernard the night before his trial, explaining his ordeal. Bernard instructed him to get a house for him. Years later, a law was passed by the Senate preventing a refusal to sell or rent property on basis of race, religion, or gender. Check your books, folks. It's called the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Subscribe for more. Flicks in 4. Bye.